Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 80 of Blown Speakers. My name is Dave Hoenigman, coming in from Yokohama, Japan. And joining us again from central Tokyo is Ed Chan and Ian Martin. Welcome back, guys. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
And yeah, just talking to both of you separately on different occasions, both of you mentioned that you would be up for discussing the fall. And when I asked which album, Hex Enduction Hour came up, high on both of your lists. So I thought it'd be a good album to discuss together. Let's see, let me get this up. So I guess I'll ask, so here we go. So it's the fall's 1982 release, okay? Considered by many to be one of their classics, if not their ultimate classic album. So, all right, I guess I'll start with Ed. Why did you choose this album?
I think when we first talked about this, you had mentioned that I think Ian had talked about either Perverted by Language or Hex Enduction Hour, and I love them both. And I think I chose Hex Enduction Hour because simply because I don't know if it's my favorite fall album, but it has my favorite song, which is Winter, the Hostile Maxi Mix. And I guess for me, it's like maybe the pinnacle of the early. Well, it's the sort of the end of the early phase, right? But when they still had that like really, really stripped down sound, and I think that's one of the aspects of the fall I like a lot. So of that kind of early period. So.
Okay, Ian, how about you?
Yeah, I mean. Maybe the same. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite fall album, but then that's always a difficult question in its own right anyway. And I don't think I've actually listened to enough fall albums to know what I think the best album by them is. It's like I own maybe 8 of their albums, which would be a lot for most bands, but is barely even scratching the surface with the fall. But I think it's maybe their most dense album. It's like there's, or at least of the ones that I've heard, it's got so many layers to it, and it's a very good one to talk about. And it has some of his absolute best lyrics on it. I mean, some of the best, or the most sort of intriguing lyrics of like anyone's ever written in the English language, I think. I don't know. There's a lot to say about this album, and if we were going to pick one, then I think why not start here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Fair enough, right? So just to talk people in, right? This was released in 1982. Let's see, to give them a time frame of the fall's late 70s and 80s output. This is their 4th album. So just off the top of my head, I think they have 31 albums, right? Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So yeah, prolific. Okay.
Like 30 albums and about like 800 live albums as well.
Right.
Yeah. And EPs and singles mixed in there too, right?
Right. Yeah, because there's that little 2-year gap between After the Gram and this, where there was also Slates, which is kind of considered one of their classics as well.
Yeah. Can you go back to the discography that
Sure.
You got from Wikipedia? Because I think, I thought Room to Live came out later. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, Room to Live is a single or an EP, right? Never mind.
This should be. I think I pulled this from album list, so it should be an album, right? But But Ed and I caught a Wikipedia mistake recently, so this could be another one. But
Oh no, you were okay. I was thinking of Living Too Late, not not Room to Live. Okay, never mind.
So I guess I want to know. All right, Ed, when did you first hear of the Fall?
Okay, I got to travel back in time. So I think this is right when I started college. So this is like 1985. And my friend who I've mentioned on other podcasts, introduced me to some stuff, and one of them was The Fall. And I can't remember what the first thing I heard was. It could have been Perverted by Language. But the first album I bought was Wonderful and Frightening World. And I just immediately was infatuated. And then I got a chance to see them. I think it's around when This Nation's Savings Grace comes out. And it was wow. It was at the Roxy Theater in LA. So it wasn't a huge show, but I mean, my memory of it is not good, but what I remember is that they only played for 40 minutes, and I was really pissed off. But what they played for 40 minutes was awesome, but it was just very short, and that's about all I remember of it. But and then I never actually saw them again after that. That was the only time.
Did they typically play short shows, or?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I know they're prone to chaos on stage and breakdowns and all sorts of stuff, but I don't know what their typical show is like. We're like.
Okay, so Ian, how about you? When did you first hear them?
I don't know. Like when I was growing up in the 90s, Mark E. Smith was like, he was just sort of part of what you knew about music without necessarily knowing if you've actually, like, you'd recognize his voice. I think I probably first got to know him through him like being like a guest musician on other people's records. Like I remember there's this like fucking crazy weird guy's voice on like the song I Want You by the Inspiral Carpets that is like, who's that guy? And then after a while you hear that same voice again somewhere else. Like I mean he was on the second Elastica album somewhere as well. Like I mean the I think it was the song how he wrote Elastica Man, which is already like a pun on a full song to begin with. And so and just sort of like John Peel would just keep talking about him. Like John Peel, famously a big fan of The Fall, and yeah, like I know. So it would just occasionally filter through. You couldn't grow up without kind of knowing who he was and who The Fall were. They were a band that were always being like name checked when when Pavement started getting big. People were just like The Fall, which is something I never really understood. Actually, I never really heard The Fall in Pavement. It was only kind of recently because we're going to this Pavement show kind of next week that I've been doing my homework and sort of really properly listening to Pavement, and now I'm like, oh yeah, no, I hear it now. Sort of Slanted and Enchanted. There are some bits in there where it's like, oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, it was just kind of it sort of filtered through the ether when I was like growing up, and it was only like years later. Like for years, I just would not buy a Fall album because there were already too many of them by like 1995, and it was one of those things where it's like if you get into this, you're committing yourself to a lifetime of sort of pain. And,
so Ian, where did you grow up?
Bristol, UK.
Okay.
How far is Bristol from Manchester?
I mean, it feels like a long way to me, but by your huge country's standards, it's sort of like, oh yeah, it's just across the way, isn't it? Bristol's southwest, Manchester is what people in the south call the north, but you know, it's sort of in the middle somewhere, really, I suppose. Um,
What you were saying about
3 hours drive, maybe 3 or 4
3
hours
hours.
drive,
Okay.
like impossibly far away. As I would imagine it.
uh, what you were saying about him just kind of being a personality, kind of like, as you know, in the 90s, whatever. I don't know, it just made me think about what there's a lot about him in right, Simon Reynolds' Rip It Up and Start Again. But this one part I thought gelled with what you're saying. He was talking about, yeah, this album, Hex Enduction album. By then, Smith had honed a media persona that made him a perennial favorite with interviewers. The classic British contrarian, suspicious of do-gooders and improvers, a curmudgeon who scorns trendy humbug and political cant, whether it comes from the left or right. Right? So the media just loved him because he gave good interview, I would think, right? So people like to involve him and stuff, would you say?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, when you said he was a personality, I think by the 90s he'd gone beyond being a personality, and he was this almost mythical figure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I ever really read any interviews with him around that, or at that point. I mean, I suppose he was still doing interviews, but like he was you know, you don't talk to Marquis Smith, you just sort of absorb his presence somehow. At least that's how he felt to me as a teenager.
Yeah, it seemed, I mean, you know, even in the US by the 90s, it seemed like he almost like was kind of became a caricature of himself in a way, and was sort of trotted out as you talked about, as the curmudgeonly contrarian guy who, you know, would tell you, you know, what you didn't want to hear or whatever.
Ian, did you have a chance to see him live?
No, I didn't. There was I was kind of late getting into like going out to festivals and things, and there's I remember like the first music festival I went to, I think it was just 2000, year 2000. I was in my early 20s, so I went to Reading, and I remember like a couple of years ago, you know, it was fun, right? It was so there was some good bands playing there. I wasn't quite sharp enough in my music taste to know the bands that I should have been going to see at that festival at the time. But a few years ago, I found like a lineup from Reading 1999, the year before. And on one of the stages, there's this lineup. It just goes, it's just like the full Guided by Voices stereo lab back to back on this one stage. And I'm like, fuck, I was 1 year late. But even if I'd gone, I would have been too dumb to know that those are the bands I should have seen. I'd have probably gone off and watched like, I don't know, some tail end bullshit Britpop bands that, you know, I'd heard of instead.
I was just watching a documentary about the Fall, and I can't remember what the guy's name is, but he produced some of the records, and but he talked about the Reading Festival, the first one, I think the one you're talking about, and he said that Marquis Smith like punched the drummer, got in a fight with the drummer at that time, and so they had to use the manager of, I can't remember what band it was, but some other band, to play drums at that show. And then I think it was after that he got banned from Reading for like 10 years, and then it was a long time before he was able to come back. So actually, so maybe that was the second one. Maybe that's when they came back. I'm not sure.
I've heard that story, and it might have been that one, to be honest. I've heard the same story. Yeah, it's just like they just grab some guy from a motorway service station or something, just like you're a drummer now, kind of thing. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even in the late 90s, he's still punching people and whatnot.
I mean, probably increasingly so.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, let's
the
see.
the other thing I remember about the Fall from the 90s, right, was that there was this TV show these two comedians did, Richard Herring and Stuart Lee, and they had their kind of comedy duo. And they had this show that was like, it was set up as like a pastiche of like a sort of morning TV sort of chat show, you know, like where there'll be these a man and a woman host, and then they'll have guests come on, and it's all very kind of light, very sort of low stress morning TV kind of thing. But they were just doing this kind of surrealist sort of really cheaply produced, half improvised nonsense, and somehow the BBC just let them be on. And so they had this show, and one of the segments they had on it was this segment called The Curious Orange. And it was just this guy dressed as an orange. And every week he'd be curious about something. And he'd be like, why is it right that, and then Stuart Lee would try and explain to him why this actually is. And he just wouldn't want to listen. He'd be like, yeah, but why? Right? It's crazy, isn't it? It's just, and the joke was always that he's not really curious about this thing at all. He just wants to he's just doing this performative act of, and I think that in some level, they were like satirizing stand-up comedy, like satirizing other comedians, which is like something that Stuart Lee sort of historically continues to do. And but yeah, the theme song of it, every time the cameras just go whoa, and they would just be playing "I Am Curious Orange" by Fall. And so I think that may have been the first time I actually heard an actual Fall song.
Huh.
In that very sort of weird scenario.
Wow.
Like Stuart Leeds talked a lot about Marquis Smith and like about the Fall as like a big influence on him, and the sort of connection between stand-up comedy and sort of post-punk scene in the 80s is maybe a kind of interesting area to explore as well. Anyway, sorry, that just just triggered that thought. Sort of jumped out of the air at me. It's like, God, yeah, there was that fucking show with the orange.
But that's a good example, though, of just how he was, even if you hadn't started buying albums yet or whatever, he was still like on your periphery of understanding. Yeah. Huh. So, like John Peel sessions, like how does that work? Would those sessions would be live on the radio, or he'd record them and then like how did those get out? Because they did multiple John Peel sessions, right? Did people listen to those live, or
they wouldn't? I don't think they were broadcast live. I don't know if they were at some point. They'd like record this, and because the songs would kind of play kind of throughout the show, wouldn't they? Like rather than as a live set. I'm not sure.
Huh.
I don't know, actually.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that until just just now. Well, shall we play a bit of a song just to kind of kick off our discussion, I guess? What do you guys think? So, Ian, I'll give you first choice. What do you think? Is there a song you'd like to play to kind of kick off our proceedings? Or play a minute or two of a song?
Shit, where to start with this?
Okay,
well, if we're going to start, let's just start with the first song and kind of go from there then.
Okay, so we'll start with the classical.
Yeah, let's have a bit of that. Oh, a bit controversial lyrics in this one, Mike.
Yeah. Are we gonna we're gonna take the hit on that? I guess.
Cool, it's your show, man.
Okay. Yeah. Let's okay. Wait a minute. Actually, I should have double checked. Okay, yeah. Okay, we're going to play a bit of the opening track, the classical. Okay, kind of a lot going on. Yeah, what do you think?
So once you know that line's there, it kind of sort of colors the whole song for you, though, doesn't it?
Hmm.
I was listening to that then. I was thinking you could really hear the way that like bands like Life Without Buildings, kind of how that sort of connected, not just the sort of spoken word kind of over that kind of music, sort of, but the flow of it and the way that like he sort of finds a line and he starts repeating that line because he just likes the sound or the feel of it and all those kinds of things. But it's just because it opens in that way, you're like, yeah, but he said that at the beginning, didn't he?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
he says a problematic word in there, right?
and it feels like kind of if you don't talk about that, then you're kind of brushing over it. But at the same time, it's like if you are going to talk about it, what is there that we can really say, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
But Ed, you said you didn't notice that line before, right? Or
I didn't remember it. I mean, I haven't heard the song in a while, and so when you played it again, then it was clearly recognizable. But you know, it's not something that ever like really kind of stuck in my mind as, oh, he says that in there in that song. Which is not to excuse it or anything, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I guess like partly to excuse it, which I realize it, which obviously isn't my place to do in the first place, but to kind of to put it in context, at least that line is in there as a criticism of somebody who is kind of you know a character who's doing this performance of being, you know, of what, you know, what nowadays you call being woke, right? It's a person who's doing a performance of that but hasn't kind of, but still like the underlying prejudices are still coming through in the person's sort of insistence on this kind of right on I don't know, like facade, right? This is somebody who is this is the position that this is coming from is Mark E. Smith as this working class musician who has a deep-seated suspicion of you know, these kind of what he would have seen as just kind of student wankers, basically, you know, people kind of hopping onto kind of like trendy ideological bandwagons but without any kind of understanding of the you know, like the underlying realities of life. Basically the sort of, you know, like the woke TV producer, but who's fundamentally this kind of shallow, sort of unreflecting person. So that's what the line is doing in the song, or that's what it's doing from his point of view anyway. But yeah, of course, obviously what the line's doing in the song, depending on who you are, is going to be a lot of different things, isn't it? So you said, you were saying before that there was that thing, John Duran thing, the Quietus.
yeah, John Duran from the Quietus. Wait, let's see. He is the co-founder and editor of the Quietus. Somehow introduces the Falls Hex Enduction Hour at a live event, and there's a footage of it, you know, on YouTube you can watch. And yeah, he talks about the problematic word at the beginning of the
There's
album.
an article on the Quietus by him as well, like where he goes really sort of very deep into the like the issues sort of around that line and about his own sort of culpability in kind of his own kind of engagement with it as well. That's very interesting and probably kind of better than anything I would say about it at this stage.
Well, yeah, I
on
would.
the album cover, there's also the like kind of asterisk to the song, and then there's a note that says, I don't understand any of this, like the context or whatever, but it says, "Spite does not enter into this. but our castle and his useless goals HQ shadowed by parachute suite style use, plus the canned response to C. James, recent TV, cast a different hue to this tune.
I can tell you what some of that is.
Please translate. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, our castle is probably Roy Castle. Was a TV presenter, and like before that, I'm not sure, he was something as well, like maybe an athlete. Like what I remember in the 80s was that he was the presenter of a show called Record Breakers, and it was basically sort of, yeah, I don't know, like every week they'd have people on there trying to break world records, and there'd always be like Norris McWhirter from the Guinness Book of Records who'd be on there to confirm whether the record has been broken. And they'd always do like really dumb things, because like every week they have to break a world record, so it'd always be like the world record for most, I don't know, most teacups in a cupboard or something, I don't know. And so when it says his useless goals HQ, maybe that's what it's referring to, like this stupid TV show where people like pointlessly try to achieve things for no reason. C. James is probably Clive James, the writer and like Australian writer, but like, and sort of, you know, general sort of general wit. He was always on TV in Britain in the 80s as well, and I guess there was a sort of vague political standpoint of what he was, but it was always quite light and very easy to watch, and you know, he's a sort of, you know, compelling speaker. But maybe there's some, maybe he represented a sort of intellectualized liberalism that Marquis Smith would have kind of reacted quite viscerally against. I'm not sure. But C. James recent TV, that's Clive James definitely, and our castle is probably Roy Castle. I mean, I guess the song is kind of like, I think that what those two things have in common is that it's sort of recent TV, sort of contemporary television that he would have found like, oh God, is this the best that we have? Sort of thing. Is this what our culture is, kind of thing? That's my guess.
I mean, it seems to be a lyric writing tactic he often used. Well, what you said before, you know, he just adopts the voice of various, you know, assholes, right? Just saying, speaking from their perspective, right? And
yeah, but I mean,
it's
just the point. It's like, if you kind of, you spend so much time adopting the voice of assholes that after a while it's like, are you just the asshole?
Yeah. And many people think he was an asshole anyways, so.
Okay, but just to get out of that corner, right? Okay, he uses a problematic word at the beginning of the album. I think you could show just how thought-provoking his music is, that we listen to like 90 seconds of it and are, you know, already spinning around kind of. Okay, but what else could you take away from the beginning of that song?
Well, the thing that I really heard a lot musically was the double drummer thing, and you know, this was that phase of their career. So like when I saw them, I don't think they had two drummers. I don't remember two drummers anyways. But that sound, like it, I mean, it's I don't know anything about, like, you know, music production or anything, but the way it sounds to me, it's like they're in a big room, there's a lot of reverb, but there's, you know, these like really hard playing drums going, and the bass is really like kind of prominent. And one of the things I've always liked about the Fall's music is the bass playing. And so this is Craig Scanlon, right? Or I'm sorry, Steve
Craig
Hammond.
Scanlon's
Steve
guitar.
Hammond, yeah. You know that. In the Fall, like, you know, musically the Fall is really interesting, just, you know, because, and of course there are the different stages, but like in this early time it's really just like, I mean, you have a bunch of people like riffing and just like laying down this like sort of track, and he just like kind of goes on his rant, you know, above that. And it, you know, it really works. Like, I mean, to be honest, I don't know that like just Marky Smith ranting on his own, like as in a spoken word performance, or even just the music by itself would really work so well. But like when you bring them together, it really, for me at least, it really is compelling in a way.
Yeah, I know like the album has a bit of has a kind of reputation for being sort of lo-fi, and the band had this reputation for being sort of all over the place, but they were such a tight band at this point. I think this is also an album where you can really, you know, it's like the way that like Can were, where like just they were just such good musicians, and they knew what they were doing so well that they could just kind of riff on something for hours. And like, I think being able to do something repetitive, it's that kind of repetition that comes from being very, very good at playing that thing, isn't it? It's like, it feels loose, but this is actually a really tight band.
He was a big Can fan, right?
Yes, yes.
I discovered
Damo Suzuki.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how, I mean, in a lot of his songs, he talks about like, you know, music that he loved, like Link Ray, and I can't remember, and then the covers like the Mr. Pharmacist from the other half, and stuff like that.
Did a couple of covers of the Monks as well, didn't he?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the theme or whatever. Yeah.
He mentions Captain Beefheart on this album.
Yeah, he does. Or he kind of, he sort of slags off young post-punk musicians sort of doing half-assed rip-offs of Captain Beefheart.
That's funny because a lot, they, you know, especially the early Fall stuff gets compared to Captain Beefheart a lot.
I mean, he loves Captain Beefheart, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's
and
just like,
you
guys are doing it wrong, is what he's saying.
It's true. I mean, the music, a lot of the music really is, and actually not just the music, but the music and the lyrics together is kind of like Captain Beefheart. You know?
Yes, it's another example of like, you know, a band that sounds like chaos, but it's the sort of crazy shit that can only come from like being really tight band.
Yeah. And again, like the lyrics for Captain Beefheart are in the same kind of vein, like in their own world, but like sort of doing its own thing.
Like you said, he mentions like other musicians and things, but he's also talking a lot about like his own kind of music scene and like people around him in this quite microcosmic level. I remember in Julian Cope's autobiography, he says about how like getting slagged off by name in a Fall song was a sort of badge of pride for young musicians coming up in Manchester and Liverpool in like the late 70s. And like he was, and he just talks about how kind of sort of unnoticed he felt when like Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen got name checked in a Fall song, and he's like, hasn't he done me yet? And then when he did do Julian Cope, it was some sort of like drugs reference, and he was like, I hadn't started taking drugs yet at that point. I was still straight edge then. And he sort of, it's like, he didn't even get me right when he did it.
Either that, or he had such a deep understanding that he knew Julian was going to start taking drugs.
Yeah, he saw it. He saw it before Cope himself saw it. I mean, it's like it's like how much faith do you put in Cope's own recollections of the time as well? I mean,
I think it sounds like I mean, I think it all plays together for me, like just the working class mentality and everything. It sounds like some like work union event that like he's trying to lead. You know, like you just picture some guy who isn't used to speaking, you know, suddenly has like a megaphone and he's trying to organize like a yard of workmen together for some reason and just screaming out different things. And even the name of the album plays, and even the cover art kind of plays into that for me. Right, right, let me grab that. I mean, just the Hex Enduction hour, which I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean, but
Induction.
Induction, yeah.
Induction. What did I say?
Education.
Education. Okay. Hex Induction hour. I mean, it sounds like something organized after work or something.
No, it's halfway between education and induction, isn't it? It's like it's a word in Marky Smith's own language.
Okay. Okay. And just the album cover, like, just looks like a bunch of frantic notes. Like, I mean, it all has this to me, it just all has this feeling of someone trying to get some kind of function going, like among coworkers, like where they don't exactly know what they're doing, but they're so driven that it's just like proceeding forward. Like, I don't know if I'm reaching there, but do you get that feeling, or is what I'm saying making any sense?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, it's like you've got to kind of draw a line somewhere to kind of link these things together, and if that's the one that works for you.
Yeah. I'm not sure it works for me, but it presents itself somehow.
Well, definitely that like kind of logo in the like in a mid right side. I mean, does look like some kind of. I mean, it looks like could be some kind of political logo. Yeah, that thing. And then the writing stuff. I mean, this is how I imagine his like kind of lyric sheets look like. All these like random words like kind of strung together and like thrown all over the place.
And the arrows don't go in straight lines, do they? They sort of shift all over the place. It's not something that's meant to be read linearly.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I think the thing in the top right, it's those are runes.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay.
I don't know. Like, I mean,
yeah,
it's hex, isn't it? It's hex. Then it says casting runes kind of down there and all of that. They look like ancient runes to me. But like maybe like his version of them or something. Who knows?
Well, and that's right. Like at least part of this record was recorded in Iceland.
Yeah,
in Reykjavik,
in some sort of crystal caves.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like, to me, it looks like the clipboard, you know, like the clipboard that the crazy guy, you know, trying to, you know, start the meeting would have as he's referring to this as he's screaming into the megaphone. I'm imagining, but but he uses the word hex, right, to draw up from like a witch or like I don't know, something I read, like a Wicker Man type. There was a writer he was into. I was hoping you guys would jump on this, but no, yeah, I'll have to look back at it. But okay, the first album,
Aleister Crowley.
It's not Aleister Crowley.
Well, he was very into Colin Wilson.
He
references Ritual in the Dark on this album.
He does, yeah, in the Deer Park album,
right?
Deer Park track,
Deer Park, yeah.
Okay, but the first album is live at the witch trials, right? So he's already got that imagery going, kind of, right? Or I mean, he definitely does them. But Hex, I mean, Hex kind of refers back to some kind of folkloric magic.
Yeah, it's also, I think there's also something kind of linguistic about it, because, you know, he's the way he uses language, he's got the he's you know, I think Marquis Smith's one of the greatest lyricists in the history of the English language, but he's also he has a very Anglo-Saxon way of using English. It's not just the vocabulary, but also just, you know, he's like kind of chopping away at meaning with an axe. Not, it doesn't have the elegant kind of flow of Latin. And I think it's important that he uses the word hex here rather than some kind of French and Latin derived words, you know, like magique or enchantement, you know, like those. He would never say a word like that. He says hex. And like sonically, the word does what Marquis Smith does when he speaks, you know. It hacks away at meaning. But this sort of, you're right, like this kind of witchcraft, like Jawbone and Air Rifle is kind of that's his sort of mystical, his little sort of mystical inner universe there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's track 2 you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
What is that? Yeah, I've been trying to put that story together in my head. Do you have a grip on that?
The guy's the character is like a poacher basically, and he hunts rabbits. He goes out at night and hunts rabbits because he's frustrated with his infertile wife, and he's like hunting rabbits in the graveyard. And is it like the grave digger or the kind of, you know, the resident of the graveyard gives him this sort of I don't know, like he does this kind of this deal, doesn't he? And he gets cursed. I think it's really yeah, it's this sort of gothic horror story, really. But this is one where I actually picked out some lyrics from it, because what is it? It's the line, "The villagers dance around prefabs and laugh through twisted mouths. Don't eat, it's disallowed. Suck on marrow bones and energy from the mainland." I thought, yeah, there's that sort of folk horror kind of thing, isn't it? Like the villagers dance around. And but it's also, I like the kind of, the villagers dance around prefabs, you know, like prefab housing. So there's this kind of ancient kind of mythic magic stacked right up against the most sort of mundane sort of infrastructure of modern life, you know. It's a very Pollardian kind of thing to do as well, isn't it? Like sort of throwing together the magical and the sort of the mundane.
Do you see a lot of connection between Marquis Smith and Robert Pollard?
In that they're both brilliant in their own quite distinct ways. But yeah, I think so. Like they both kind of make poetry out of nonsense, and they're both very good at choosing exactly the right word to make you feel what you need to feel at that moment without ever really kind of pinning it down to a specific literal meaning. There's also in this line, has that line, something with visions of islands heavily covered in slime, which kind of always makes me think of Coleridge, you know. I'm hearing a bit of like Rime of the Ancient Mariner in that. It's like, slimy things did crawl with legs upon the slimy sea. Smith was very well read.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I was looking at the lyrics to that track this morning, and yeah, trying to get my head around it. But yeah, it's very it's beautiful, but I'm not sure I've put it together correctly. Yet.
I think the other great thing about his lyrics and even his singing is, to be honest, when I listen to the fly, I don't pay that much attention to the lyrics, but every once in a while, like certain phrases stick out, and they're really, it's like a pop song. I mean, they really like rattle around in your brain. But even if you don't really understand what he's saying, and to be honest, I mean, half the time I don't really understand what he's saying, it's still like a great, like, vocal performance, even without really knowing what he's saying and what it means. And some of the references are so obscure, like, whether it's literary or philosophical or whatever, or even just like so like like you were just talking about, so mundane, like what he sees going on outside his window, like some kid walking around or whatever. It almost doesn't matter, but it still like sort of works as poetry, or lyrics, or whatever you want to call it. And part of that is his performance of it, but also I think it is his way of choosing and using language.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to listen to his music. I think maybe this is similar to what we were saying last time about listening to the Fiery Furnaces as well. It's like you don't really listen to it kind of chronologically. You listen to it almost ambiently, and then you just let these words or phrases jump out of it at you. Like you listen to it the way you read this, right?
Yeah.
You kind of, you just look at it, and then Nuki Boars, yeah. Saxon Gaelic pour process, right? Yeah. And it also reminds me, I was saying before about the connection between like the sort of punk scene and stand-up comedy in Britain, though, and like I was watching some old clips of Alan Partridge, the character Alan Partridge, played by Steve Coogan, who famously played, he was like the main character in 24-Hour Party People as well. But like some of the stuff that he did as Alan Partridge as a sports presenter, I was watching this clip of him like as a sort of incompetent sports presenter he's like doing horse racing commentary, and like the joke is just horses in horse racing have like ridiculous names, right? And so he starts out commentating the race. He's like, and it's Abba the horse, followed by Small Town Gypsy Massacre, and it's Christ's Chin, Alf Ramsey's Porn Dungeon coming up the rear, Christ's Chin. And like by the end, it just dissolves into just him yelling out these kind of evocative but completely meaningless phrases. And there's a point where you're like, this is a full song,
Totally.
There is no way that actor, that Steve Coogan, was not influenced by The Fall. Grew up in Manchester in the 1980s. He was definitely influenced by The Fall. Like Stuart Lee was one of the writers on that show when it originally came out. Like that all these writers were listening to The Fall. Like Stuart Lee said explicitly, like what a big influence The Fall was on him, on his writing as a comedian, and you can see the way that he uses language. He's sort of consciously kind of trying to do something similar to this. Like he'll do these like comic routines where you realize that the joke really just hinges on like a word or phrase sounding funny, not anything that the comedian is really trying to tell you exactly. And yeah, I don't know. I think that British comedy wouldn't be the way it is without Marky Smith, to be honest.
Ian, I don't want to put you in the position of a native informant, but maybe I will. But so for me, like as an American, like I have really, I mean, I have a sense, but not a real sense of like kind of what Manchester sort of represents to other people in Britain. And I mean, the other question I have is like, what was it that helped produce the incredible music scene late 70s and early 80s that led to anything? I mean, so my first question is just like, what is there like a kind of stereotype of Manchester that people in Britain sort of have? Like, so for example, in the US, like, you know, everybody thinks of the South as like hicks and racists and all that kind of stuff. Or, you know,
What's the
okay.
stereotype? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, there are certain sort of people, there are certain stereotypes that people from the South have of like the North as a whole.
Mm.
But you know, like North Liverpool is a very different thing from North Yorkshire. Manchester, I don't know really. Like,
I mean, it was an industrial town, right? I mean, the historic.
yeah, it was sort of the kind of center of the Industrial Revolution. And it's sort of like the alternate capital city. It's like the capital city of the North.
Oh, okay.
Um, and it's like it's very close to Liverpool. I think
Mm.
I think that's probably important. It meant all the bands from Liverpool and Manchester, they could just like play in each other's cities. It's something like 30 miles away or something. It's like a
Mm.
it's just up the river.
Mm.
And so that probably helped the music scene. Like just the fact that there's a lot of big cities very close to each other there, that like it's not that far from Leeds either, really.
Mm.
And the greater Manchester area makes it a bigger city than it maybe looks on paper.
Mm.
So I think part of the reason that there was so much good music there was that, you know, it's far enough away from London that it wasn't sort of, it's not subsumed by the London kind of music culture, but it's close enough to a lot of other big cities that they were able, that there was that kind of critical mass of audience and sort of wealth of creativity that they could kind of, yeah, they could reach this sort of critical mass to support themselves. Like where I'm from in Bristol is another city kind of similar size to Manchester, but actually much smaller, because as soon as you step outside Bristol, it's just cows. And like the nearest big city is Cardiff, which is not that far away, but it's in another fucking country entirely. You know, don't even speak the same language. I mean, in Cardiff they do, but so I think it's a bit harder for a city like Bristol to, you know, I mean, it had its own very, very kind of active and, you know, lively scene in the punk era, but it was much more of an island within England. So I think that there are some things there. It's, yeah, like I don't want to say like Manchester's like the center of Northern culture, because then there's a lot of kind of little local regional pride things there. People from Liverpool just like the fuck it is, you know? But it is kind of in the middle of a lot of those cities, you know, Liverpool, Wigan, Leeds, you know, its own kind of little kind of ecosystem of towns like Salford and Oldham and stuff. So
does Manchester itself have like a very strong identity, like even among all those cities? Because so I had a friend who is from Manchester. I tried to get on the show here with us, but and you know we were talking about the fall, and he was sort of about the same age group as Marky Smith was, and so you know, was around at that time. And one of the things he said, you know, so Marky Smith has that like very distinctive Manchester accent, but he was actually saying that there's another city like adjacent to Manchester, like that Marky Smith is actually from, and his accent is even stronger. It's like the strongest form of like a Manchester accent or something that you can have, or something. I can't remember what the name of this other part was.
Salford.
Salford, yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, like
But-
Salford is like kind of Manchester plus. Yeah.
I'm curious about when you said, so it seems like he influenced a lot of these comedians and they would reference him, right? Sometimes indirectly, but I mean, using his song in that one orange bit, Curious Orange bit. Was he receptive to that? Like, did he ever actually go on any of these comedy shows? Like, was he? Because
he wouldn't.
Okay, because
I don't think they'd ask him. It would be wrong.
okay.
I don't know. I mean, he did appear in. He was in 24-Hour Party People, though, wasn't he? He did a cameo in that.
Okay.
I don't remember.
There's a scene in it. He's just queuing outside the hacienda in one scene, and you just see that like Steve Coogan like walks past him, and he's like, "All right, there, Mark," and he's like, "Hey," you know, and that's it. But he does make a cameo appearance in that.
Because I do see a bit of a parallel with Lemmy, right, of Motorhead. I mean, just kind of a tunnel visioned, band leader who just stuck to it for 30 plus years, 40 years. But Lemmy would go on the Young Ones, right? And I mean, as Motorhead. But then I also saw him. There's some clip on YouTube where Lemmy's in some goofy, like, I don't know, it's kind of pie contest or something on a British comedy show. And I was just wondering if that would be, I don't know, would it be normal for musicians to be on those kind of shows at that time? Or?
Well, I mean, but the Young Ones was a special case because they got their budget from the BBC, not from the comedy budget, but from the kind of light entertainment budget or something. And so they were only able to make the show if they had a musical element on every episode. And so that's why they brought a band on each time.
Okay.
I mean, like in more recent years, like since the 90s, there was this musical sort of comedy quiz show called Nevermind the Buzzcocks, and they'd always have like musicians on and comedians both on that. It's a sort of kind of a panel show, sort of game show kind of quiz show sort of thing. I mean, I can imagine Marky Smith appearing on that once or twice, although I'm sort of terrified to imagine what might have happened. I mean, they'd have edited it down to something acceptable, but I don't have any recollection of ever seeing him on any of those kinds of shows, but I'm not saying he didn't.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're going to listen to a bit of another track. This is track 6 on side 1. And also it turns into track 1 on side 2. So Ed, this is a song you chose is one of your favorite fall songs.
Yes.
Yeah, so anything you'd like to say before we play it, or would you like to comment after?
I guess I don't have anything on cue, so I'll say something after. I'll try to say something after.
Okay, good. Oops.
Entrances uncovered, street signs you never saw, all entrances delivered, courtesy winter. Entrances uncovered, street signs you never saw, all entrance is delivered. Courtesy winter. Entrance is uncovered. Street signs you never saw. You got money in the library. Working off his hangover, 3:30. Get the spleen at 3:15, but it's 3:13.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I think one of the things I love about the song is that build up at the beginning, how it just is, it's just the guitar mostly and bass, like kind of just strumming, but then it builds into this like explosion, and I don't know. I mean, it's one of the things when they do it right, the fall. I mean, it's just great. I mean, it technically not very sophisticated necessarily, but I mean, it just comes together so well. And then with his like kind of, I don't know, to me they seem like almost like stream of consciousness lyrics, like just like kind of improvising maybe. I don't know, that just it works really well. And that, the first like kind of verse that he repeats, the entrance is uncovered, blah blah blah. Again, I don't know that they have any real special meaning for me, but it just sounds right, and it just like sort of, I don't know, fits in. When I listen to it, it just really like, it's perfect. Like so okay, that's my opening riff.
Mm.
And like you say, it sort of builds to this explosion, but it builds this explosion without ever really changing any of the things it's doing.
That's right. That's right.
It's you have this sense of a climax, but every piece is still doing the same thing that it was doing before.
Right.
And which part of that, I think, I guess that's Craig Scanlon, the guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's just sort of doing something subtly different. They've kicked up the volume, and his guitar is kind of a bit more playful after that, right? So you get the sense of having like picked up the pace without changing the pace, actually.
Yeah. Right.
Where it has yeah, that famous quote about the Fall, isn't it? It's like always different, always the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's so hypnotic, in a way. Yeah, I don't know. And it's like, it's really hard not to like, like move your head along with the song. It's so like primal, like rock and roll, in a way.
Yeah.
Well, earlier, I think Ian said something about like him just looking out the window, maybe to get his next bit of lyrics, right? And that part strikes me as that when he says, the boy, they're walking the dog, and the boy says, "Give me the lead, give me the lead." Like it, to me, it sounds like something he would have just glanced out the window and seen at that moment and included. perhaps.
Yeah, it's like one of the things we were saying, like when the when the mics were turned off earlier, was that this is like an everyday scene that this song's describing, but there's this sort of I feel like there's this tremendous aura of menace around the song.
Mm.
You're not quite sure what's going on or what's wrong, but everything's a little bit off, a little bit broken or twisted in some way. But you don't have the clue for what it is exactly.
You got Manny in the library working off his hangover at 3:30. You get the spleen at 3:15, but it's 3:13 at the moment.
Oh no!
Yeah,
2 minutes to the spleen.
And the other thing about Marky Smith is like he's got such a like sly sense of humor and very like subtle at times. I mean, you know, that just like kind of comes out in little splits like that.
Yeah, a lot of mention of alcoholics, it seems. Here and there throughout his work, I guess. I wonder why.
What is Barbican? Like, so he says cans of Barbican.
I think it was a brand of beer that I don't.
Oh, really?
I think so.
That's what I took it to mean, but yeah, I mean, I don't know actually. The lawn was littered with cans of Barbican.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I've heard it somewhere else before, but I have no idea what it is. But anyway.
Don't know.
And then, oh, go ahead.
There's a non-alcoholic drink called Barbican, made by Coca-Cola Beverages, but
yeah, there's also that little bit about his like kind of rant against like liberals, the feminist car and all that kind of stuff.
maybe it's like Barbican is a sort of not like a non-alcoholic beer or something, so maybe that's why there's all the cans outside the Alcoholics Dry Out house.
Oh, right, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right.
I don't know. It says here non-alcoholic malt drink.
Oh.
So maybe it's kind of used as a sort of beer substitute or something for people trying to dry out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Originally launched in 1982.
Very, very, very of the moment. Yeah.
Mm.
So what do you guys make of the fact that if you look at this as one track, it begins at the end of side A and continues to side B? So it's like four and a half minutes about side A, and yeah, actually equal length, 4.5 at the beginning of side B. So what's your take on that?
Firstly, maybe practical, because this is a 1 hour long album on 2 sides of vinyl, which, you know, I've always have an issue with this with bands nowadays where they're like so hung up on audio fidelity. So you'll find a band, they'll have like a 48-minute long album, and somehow that means you have to get 3 sides of vinyl. You know, fucking like recent Mountain Goats albums like that. It's like 47 minutes long, 48 minutes long album, and so I have to fucking change the disc for the last 3 songs instead of just him taking the hit on fidelity, that imperceptible hit audio fidelity, and just squeezing it in, you know. And anytime I see somebody doing the new Yo La Tengo album is going to be like that as well. It's like 48 minutes or whatever, 3 sides of vinyl. It's ridiculous. I'm always like 3 words: Hex Enduction Hour. Right? Just take the hit, man. This album sounds magnificent. It's fine. An hour on one vinyl. But maybe a lot of the songs in the album are quite long, like 7-10 minutes long, right? Maybe it's just sort of they were squeezing it so much. They're like, no, we're going to have to split this song over two sides. Maybe there was no way of like adjusting the track order in a way that would fit or something. But I'm not sure. So maybe that was part of it. But you've got to think they could have done. And he's like, no, I want it in this order.
Yeah.
Song in half, right?
Yeah, I see it as a bit of a fuck you to something, but I don't know what. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they could have done it. They could have put Who Makes the Nazis on earlier and had all of Winter on them.
Yeah.
On side, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the timing now. Yeah, it would have been no problem to get it on one side. Yeah. Interesting. You know, I found that author. I was racking my brain to so Arthur Machen. Have you guys heard of this guy? So I'm so this is just a bit let's see, it's talking about how Marky Smith was fascinated with weird fiction. Okay. His lifelong fascination with the world of weird fiction, particularly the works of H.P. Lovecraft, M.R. James, and above all, the writings of Arthur Machen. So I haven't heard of Arthur Machen, but a student, and I think he was either Chinese or Korean, mentioned Arthur Machen to me recently, and I was like, oh, I don't know, I don't know who that is. So yeah, and I guess Marky Smith was a huge fan. So that's interesting. But I think it's somehow related to that folkloric kind of fantasy, you know, witchcraft type stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, like Mark Fisher has written about the Fall, and one of the kind of things that he sort of always he's come back to a few times, I think, is about like his relationship with sort of Gothic and the eerie. I think it was like in the weird and the eerie. I'm sure he talks about the Fall in that, and like in some of his like K-punk articles, he discussed these kinds of things. I can't remember the specific articles now. It's like I've got the book, big thick monster sort of collection of all the K-punk sort of essays, but I wouldn't be able to pick it out now.
I was just reading about him yesterday. What's the name of the book you mentioned?
Like I haven't read it, but The Weird and the Eerie, by Mark Fisher. I'm not sure if he talks about the Fall in that book, but it's just sort of given the title and given what some of the things that he wrote in his essays, I kind of feel like he must have done. That's all. Yeah.
Why? So wait, which do you guys? Which tracks did they record in Iceland? What was Winter one of them?
Iceland was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the record, it just says like 1/4 of the album was recorded in Iceland.
Okay.
I think it's the ones that are most obviously jam sessions were like recorded in, like one take in a cave or something. But
okay.
Winter would qualify with that, definitely.
Possibly, yeah.
Any idea what hostile maxi means? I mean, to me, it means nothing. But
what?
The subtitle for the song is Hostile Maxi, but I don't know what that means.
Hostile Maxi.
Like maxi was like a kind of term they were using right in the 80s for like special singles or something like that, I think.
I don't know if they were in Britain though.
Yeah,
not sure what that refers to.
Just curious.
Maybe it's just the place they were staying in Iceland or something.
Okay, let's I don't think I've shown these.
Oh, one kind of thing it could be, because in the lyrics, when there's that line where it talks about there was a feminists Austin maxi parked outside with anti-nicotine, anti-nuclear stickers on the side. And so an Austin maxi was a kind of car. And so hostile maxi might be a kind of play on words on, so part of it might be a sort of play on words on that line in the song about the Austin maxi. Maybe.
Huh. Yeah, it's an interesting bit of lyrics there. Let's look at some images. Let's see. Oh, this is a picture.
Yeah, that Hip Priest was recorded in Iceland.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Hip Priest. So Hip Priest, and it's like, right, 2 or 3 songs from the album. I should have that handy, but
it's the 3rd song. Yeah.
Oh, no, but I mean the songs that were recorded in Iceland. So they did, even in the mid 80s, it seemed they were already touring internationally. I mean, the fact that you saw them, Ed, in California, right? And they went to Iceland. They would go to New Zealand. So I guess I'm kind of surprised by that. I didn't, the fact that they were, already well known enough to travel internationally. Well, I guess we're getting, fairly into their career at this point, but I mean that they were big enough to travel internationally is kind of surprising to me.
I mean, definitely by the time I saw them, they were already they were legendary, already legendary.
Okay.
Even in the US. But
okay.
I mean, when this album came out, 1982, I mean, there's still, I don't know that they, at least in the US, that they still sort of broken into, popular or not, consciousness of music buffs and stuff like that. But because it seems like it's really when Bricks enters, and then so from Perverted by Language on that they really start like becoming big. And so in 82, when they put out this record, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they played in the US, but I don't think it would be at the same level as when I saw them in 85 or 86 or whatever it was.
So the Roxy, was that a big place?
It wasn't big. I mean, I can't, I'm so bad at judging crowd size, so I don't know how many people it would hold, but it was like kind of a largish club, I guess I would say. But it's the place like in the mid 80s that this is where almost everyone who had some kind of name played. So, I mean, I saw a lot of great shows there, like Sonic Youth after Evol came out. That's where the Jesus and Mary Chain played, I'm pretty sure. I'm a little foggy on that, but I think it's where they played. As we talked about in previous podcast, I saw the Meat Puppets there a number of times. And so, it wasn't huge. It wasn't like, so the Hollywood Palladium was a big, like, ballroom kind of place where, but, you had people like the Cramps and stuff like that playing there. But the Roxy was like kind of the mainstay for, I think, bands at a like sort of certain level.
So these are just some photos I grabbed, right? A couple photos of Marky Smith on stage in late 1982.
Yeah, and the next one, didn't it say they're in New Jersey with a picture with Carl?
Okay, yeah, Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Home of Viola Tango.
1981, right?
Yeah. So these guys played on the album,
as well,
right?
At that time. Would have been the Feelies as well, kind of around this time, I think, maybe.
Okay.
Hoboken. It's funny, like, Marky Smith is like 24, 25 in these pictures. It's like, he sounds like he was born 50 years old.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. This is just seems to be a classic photo of them when they do like a, retrospective rewrite of them for The Guardian or something. They often use this photo. This photo's in the Simon Reynolds book too. I think just because it's such a great shot of Marky Smith that it gets used a lot. Is that John Peel on the left, standing behind the band?
I don't think so.
Okay, I could do. That's not him. Okay.
No.
Well, what do you think? Should we hear a bit of Hip Priest?
Sure.
Okay, we'll play a bit of Hip Priest, which is kind of an iconic track, or is an iconic track off this album.
Drink the long draft, Dan, for the Hip Priest. I said drink the long draft, Dan, for the Hip Priest.
Kind of before it kicks in, but wait, the songs that are recorded in Iceland are, yeah, as we mentioned, Hip Priest, Iceland, and then there's a non-album single, Look No. So three tracks. But why yeah, I didn't feel that we probably should have played more of that song, but why do you think Hip Priest is such an iconic track? Or is it not? Is it? But I mean, I feel like it is.
Because the phrase "hip priest" is like a really, it's one of his most kind of memorable sort of phrases, and he says it a lot in the song. But it's it's the beat, like the rhythm. It's just that kind of dum 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 dum. There's a kind of I don't know, it's almost like kind of Southern Gothic kind of rock and roll sort of swamp garage kind of thing going on there. It grabs at one of the fundaments of rock and roll, and then he just says the same words repeatedly many times, and it's a very catchy phrase. I think that's what makes it ironic, honestly. Iconic. I mean, also ironic because it's Marky Smith, but
I was sort of, I mean, I've never really thought about it too much, but I always like kind of imagined that he was, I think ironically, like sort of kind of describing himself and his like sort of persona, his persona.
I think that's what it is. It's like
I mean,
he's confused at why people kind of
don't cherish him.
Why people cherish him.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, so I don't know, and it's a theme that like kind of returns right later in the career, like on Curious Orange and stuff like that. But
and this
I was really blown away, like when I saw Silence of the Lambs in the theater. I know you were going to talk about this, Dave, but and you know, it's the scene, you know, it's the scene where she's in the cell, the well, down in the well. And you know, I remember sitting in the theater. I had no idea that this was going to happen, and then you know, the song comes on, and or no, I'm sorry, it's not when it's. I think it's when like they're going through the guy's house.
Yeah. Well, see, Ed, here I have the description.
Oh, okay, okay.
But you're right, right? So Clarice Starling pursues Buffalo Bill into his multi-room basement where she discovers that Catherine is still alive but trapped in a dry well, right?
So I think it's when the lights are out and, you know, she can't see. But it was like the idea of having like the fall and even particularly this song like sort of playing in the background like during this. And, you know, it's not clear if it's supposed to be like, you know, diegetic sound, like if it's in the world of this, like it's being played on the guy's radio, or you know, if it's just background music. But it was like I was so shocked that it would appear in a film like of that magnitude at the time. And I think it came out in '91.
That's around the time that they were having their closest sort of brush with mainstream fame, wasn't it? It was like kind of the infotainment scan was around that time, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
And
Oop, wait. Okay, so we were talking about Silence of the Lambs. We're guessing it was 91 or so, like early 90s. And yeah, Ian, you were saying something about the Fall's popularity at that time.
91, yeah.
well, I think that was around the time that the infotainment scan came out, which was maybe as close as they ever got to sort of mainstream.
Banquet and the Curious Orange like ballet thing had happened, and he became sort of a well-known, like even, you know, like kind of embraced to a degree by the high art world or whatever.
I don't know. I don't know why they. I mean, I can understand why they might have picked